But I stood up and I walked up onto the side of the cross, and I stood exactly where Marsden stood to preach the gospel, and I thought, what a cool thing it would be to be the first person to preach the Christian message in the history of a nation. But then a friend of mine, and some of you know her too, Cindy Ruakeri, she pointed out this. She says Marsden wasn't first, because nearly 100 years before, the first ever Christian missionary preached the gospel on these islands that we live on. There was a non-Christian guy, a Maori seer by the name of Toiro, who said this. He prophesied this. He wasn't a Christian. He didn't know the God of heaven and earth, but he was a visionary, and he said, there is a new God coming to the land of the long white cloud, and his name is the Son who was killed. That's pretty outrageous. And you know what I reckon? I reckon God's been after New Zealand for a lot longer than we know. And I think he's after New Zealand right now. I think he's after us one heart at a time. And you know, I don't know, I can't speak for you, but I'm determined that if he's after New Zealand, and if the way he wants to get New Zealand is one heart at a time, I'm determined that he can have mine. And I want to pray and ask God that he would have yours too. That if he's after this nation one heart at a time, that something would rise up in you that says, you can have mine too. Because here's what I believe. I believe that we're going to start seeing God do very unexpected things in very unexpected places through very unexpected people. If you look at the Bible, just about every person that God did something radical with was someone who didn't expect it, and no one else would have expected it either. Think about this. You're out minding your own business as a shepherd, and a bush catches fire and starts talking to you. Think about that. We read the Bible in such a sterile fashion. And yes, and then the voice spake unto Moses from the bush. Think about what it was like. When was the last time you were looking after some sheep and a bush said, hey, come over here and take off your shoes? Has that happened to you in your garden lately? It hadn't happened to me. I was out doing some gardening at my place today, and no bush called me over and told me to take off my shoes. And then the bush says this, hey, by the way, I'm God in this bush, and I choose you to set my people free from 400 years of bondage to the most powerful nation that has ever existed to this point. You know what Moses didn't say? He didn't go, oh yes, I've been expecting you. What did he say? He went, you got to be kidding me. Are you kidding? No way, I can't do this. And he tries to convince God that God's got the wrong man. But the more he tries to convince him, the more God seems to go, yeah. Or think about this. There's a guy by the name of Amos. He was also a shepherd. And one day a guy comes to him and says, hey, Amos, you think you're a prophet, eh? And he turns around, and this is his answer from Amos chapter 7. He says, nah, I ain't a prophet. I ain't the son of a prophet. I ain't anything to do with a prophet. I'm a shepherd from Tekoa, and I was out looking after my sheep by the sycamore trees. Then God spoke to me. Now hear the word of the Lord. He was shocked as well, and God picked him. Think about this. Imagine you're Jesus for a moment, and you're about to start a thing that has never existed before called the church, and you need someone to help you start it, to lay the foundations and write 2/3 of the New Testament of the Bible. Who do you pick? You pick the guy that's been trying to kill the church, who's been killing Christians and trying to destroy the church. He picks the weirdest people, unexpected people. You know the thing I like about that is that means there's room for you and me. Because I tell you what, New Zealand, you know when you're in America, it can be hard to know that New Zealand's even here. It really, truly can. I find myself, so if I'm on a long trip, I'll go to the supermarket and I will look for evidence that we even exist. I look for the kiwi fruit, but half the time they're from China. I look at the dairy section, and often there's not even any of our cheese in there. But God picks unexpected people, and he uses unexpected places, and he's going to do some unexpected things. So just get ready for that. If you're sitting here thinking, well, God couldn't use me, I reckon you might just find yourself being picked by him. So if God's looking to use New Zealand and he's after us one heart at a time, just make sure he's got yours. Because 2 Chronicles 16:9 says, the eyes of the Lord range to and fro throughout the earth, that he might give strong support to those whose hearts belong completely to him. So I've just determined he can have all of mine. Sometimes it might get a bit weird, might get a bit unexpected, but just give him everything you got and let's see what happens. Hello? You're not a very chatty bunch, are you? You right? You doing okay? You're understanding my Hutt Valley accent? Right, on to my topic. Here's relief. Oh, phew, goodness me. Got to watch these preachers with their bunny trails, eh? You know, you head up a bunny trail and find it was a motorway on-ramp and you can't get back. In Matthew chapter 19, there's this passage that tells the story of Jesus with all the kids climbing all over him. So there's little kids climbing all over Jesus, and the disciples come along and they say, shoo, 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 and they start to rebuke the kids' parents and say, get these kids off him. And then Jesus says a certain thing. He says, let them come and don't hinder them. You know what I've wondered? I've wondered why the disciples didn't think the kids should be climbing all over Jesus. And you know, I'm a parent, I've got 3 wonderful kids, and 2 of them are boys. And one thing I've noticed particularly about boys is that they have a particular ability to get rather grubby and to damage themselves. I've got a 10-year-old son and a 2-year-old son, and I was looking at my 2-year-old son the other day, and he's got so many bruises and little hacks and cuts all over his little legs, he almost looks like me and my wife should be in jail. You know what I mean? By the way, we didn't do that to him, just so you know, okay? And my big son, he's 10 years old, and I don't know why we buy him shoes. We buy him shoes, and by the time he's worn out, they still look brand new because he doesn't wear them. And his feet are always dirty. And maybe, as these kids were climbing all over Jesus, maybe one of them was a real kid who had dirty feet. Maybe the disciples were a bit worried that they were going to get dirt on the Son of God. Well, we can't have that. Maybe one of them, being a real kid, had a big cut on his knee and maybe it was bleeding. Oh, we don't want to get a blood stain on the Son of God. Here's another thing I've noticed about kids, particularly at certain times of the year. They get snotsicles. Maybe one of those kids had boogers running down his face and the disciples were, we don't want to get boogers on the Son of God now, do we? And maybe what was happening here was they were a bit worried that they were going to get Jesus dirty or crinkled or messy. And Jesus was saying, hey boys, don't be so prissy. Let the kids come. I don't care if they got dirty feet. I don't care if they wipe boogers on me. I don't care if one of them gets a blood stain. Just let them come because I'm not prissy like that. And here's what I want to suggest to you about the topic I'm going to talk to you very briefly about tonight. Is that sometimes in the church we get a bit prissy. We say things like this. I'm sure it doesn't get said here, but we say things like this. Oh, well, Christians shouldn't talk about politics, money, or sex. And the reason we shouldn't talk about that is because we're prissy. And so what happens then is that the devil gets to be the loudest voice speaking into that void, and the church loses her influence, and the church stops articulating the will of God into those areas. We prefer, perhaps, to come up with pat answers and cliches instead of rolling up our sleeves and getting real.